Hello, Chris.
Hello.
How are you?
Not too bad. How are you?
I'm well, thank you.
Good.
I am good.
Hello.
Hello, Sarah. How are you?
Good, how are you?
I'm well, thank you. Yeah, all good over here. Although I'm slightly depressed about the weather change.
It's a shame, isn't it?
You wait till the clocks go back. That's when things start getting really challenging psychologically.
I know. Why? Why do we still do it? How many farmers are we helping?
It's easier to get young children to go to sleep in the winter.
That's true, but it's not easier to get them to wake up before school in the dark.
That's not yet my problem, fortunately.
Yeah, just do wait.
Hi.
Oh, there you are.
Hello.
Nice to see you. Nice to meet you.
You too.
Well, I hope everyone else joins us soon because we've got 2 minutes.
Yeah, especially the other panelists.
That's yeah. That's mainly what I was talking about.
Apparently, the subject of putting kids to bed early in the winter. Laura Ashley, when she was starting her business in the 70s, used to tell her children it was bedtime at 4:30 in the afternoon. So they should do her printing at her kitchen table. Get them out.
That's a great strategy until 4:30 the following morning.
That's
Exactly.
yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Limited success with that.
Yes.
Hello, Mark.
Hiya.
Hi.
Hi.
Nice to see you. Well, let's see, who else do we need? We need Simon. And
Yes.
is that it? I guess that's the only other. Oh, my colleague Emma says hello.
Hiya.
Hi, Emma.
Making it all happen in the background. And then we probably also ought to give everyone a few minutes. Now, in terms of like tech check, everyone their connection seems good. Sarah, will you be sharing your screen with us at some point to show us your work? Is that, have you got that?
If you'd like me to do that, I'm ready to do that. Yeah.
Okay.
Brilliant. I want to see the Nike box.
Here you go. Sounds good to me. And here we have Simon. Hello, Simon.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah.
You can, yes.
Always a good start.
Indeed. Important thing. How are you doing?
Yeah, no, I'm good. I mean, I had a couple of weeks away and then Art Basel all last week. So
How was that?
it was very good. It was very different. A little more relaxing than previous years. I think just a different
In a good way.
Yeah, it was.
I guess the footfall was a lot lower and it felt a bit more spacious and less busy and all the rest of it.
That and, dare I say it, less Americans. So,
Funny enough, I spoke to at least one dealer who was lamenting precisely that point. Yeah.
Oh, it's all about perspective, isn't it, Chris?
It is.
So, some were saying as a result, they could have deeper, lengthier, more engaged conversations rather than just what's the price, yes or no. But I'm sure it was a little more to it than that. But different vibe, but it was good. It was good to be back. I think somebody described it. It was something like a 25-year school reunion, seeing people you hadn't seen for a year and a half, 2 years. So it was fun. And Chris, you'll be pleased to hear the sausages were as good as ever.
Excellent. That was going to be my next question, actually. So
yeah.
I'm glad.
Well,
I
I'm
hope they were served with a very frothy lager.
The bad thing was I ate yours as well. So
Well, I should be back next year.
Well, I'm looking forward to that element with Freeze of, seeing faces from pre-COVID faces yesteryear. Would be nice. But as long as, I'm glad to hear it wasn't kind of tumbleweeds, because one of my board members was talking about the Chelsea Flower Show in London as being tumbleweeds. So
oh, really? Wow.
yeah, apparently. Although, Chelsea Flower Show in September, that's just crazy and weird.
What about the RA summer exhibition in October? Yeah.
Yeah,
okay.
that's
Pretty busy.
Hmm?
I think that was pretty busy.
well,
No,
that's
it's just
But
the out of season. Having the summer show going on until December or something. Yeah, it's kind of weird. It's great. It's perfect, but
Yeah.
it's good.
it probably should be rebranded just for this year. Right. Well, I think we will make a start. Let me just. All right. If anyone else besides Sarah has plans to share their screen to introduce themselves or their company or what they do, then just get ready and do it at the time that you wish. And I'll be sure to allow everyone to screen share. So, thank goodness for that security protocol that always messes everyone up, not automatically allowing other people to screen share. Okay, and I have all of my materials ready, I think. There we go. Okay, so hello, everyone, and welcome to a special edition of ArtEvolve on Tuesday. Whoa. Crazy. Talk about things out of sync in the industry, right? We're having a special ArtEvolve brought to you, co-hosted this time with Dax. And the topic this week is on making art fair shipping more sustainable. Artists and galleries call for change. So I want to just introduce this topic and my guests. First of all, art fairs are back, but how can we make them more sustainable? In this edition of ArtEvolve, we take a look at sea freight shipping and the carbon and cost savings it affords in comparison to air and road. We'll hear from Dax, established by artists for artists. Dax acts as a that's a tongue twister, I have to say. Dax acts as a trusted artist rights broker for 100,000 artists worldwide, and is a world leader within a global network of sister societies about why it's important for artists and galleries to advocate for change, as well as hearing from artists themselves about their role in leading the industry to more sustainable practices. But what are the practicalities of adopting sea freight shipping? Simon Hornby from Crozier Fine Art, Christopher Bentley from AXA XL Art, and myself will be sharing our expert insights and discussing exactly how change can be implemented. So let's kick off by asking each of you to tell us a bit more about yourself and your background. And briefly, we have with us Mark Law, the Business Development Director at Dax, Sarah Staton, an artist, practicing artist, and member of Dax, Simon Hornby of Crozier. Simon, your new title is the Chief Head Guru of everything European, right? Is that correct?
That sounds a little grandiose, but Senior Vice President and General Manager for Crozier, Western Europe. Yeah.
There we go. And Christopher Bentley, I'm afraid I don't have your title here. I know that you're AXA XL Art, which is a mouthful enough, really. But what is your, can you share with us your title?
I'm the head of fine art and specie in the UK.
Thank you. And then myself, Annika Eriksson, founder and CEO of Articheck. So why don't we start with Mark? Do you want to give us a little bit of background and introduction into yourself and DAX?
Yeah, sure. So basically, I joined DAX in 2014, and before that, as an artist and curator, that's how I got involved in the visual arts. And then I worked for the Arts Council, and then I became director of a private arts foundation, which put on some very large-scale exhibitions. And from there, I became the arts commissioner for 3 art fairs in Seoul, where I got very close up and dirty involved in the business of moving artworks around. And then also since 2007, I've been the chair of the International Curators Forum, which has worked to extend the impact and visibility of curators and artists from diverse backgrounds in the UK and internationally. And through that, have engaged, I suppose, very closely again with the biennial as an environment for exhibiting art and the kind of the ecological impact of that. Become very aware of that. And as DAX, as an organisation, we have a kind of financial mission to transform the financial landscape of artists, but we also have a mission which is aligned with that, which is to act, with the artists we represent. And our sense is that artists are really concerned about the climate emergency. So we have adopted that at board level as one of our principles to work within our own organisation to be as sustainable and conscious as possible through the really obvious things of kind of energy efficiency, recycling, etc. Changed all of our investment policies to ensure that they were sustainable. And we've looked at ways in which we can work with our members to help them get informed about what best practice might look like. And that's why we're really excited to be working with you guys, because you have come to us with a number of different, I suppose, entrepreneurial visions of how we can act more ecologically in the art market. And I think that's important for DAX membership to think about, that always a crisis like COVID, shock at first, but then the solutions can actually move you forward in really positive ways. And that's what I hope we're going to be able to explore in this conversation.
You're here, agreed. Sarah, do you want to share a little introduction with you next?
Oh, hi there. Yeah, thank you for inviting me, and it's nice to be here this afternoon. I work as an artist and an educator. I'm senior tutor at Royal College. And yeah, so in the exhibitions that I do, I think increasingly about how to reduce the scale of the items that are being transported overseas, particularly. Something that my students are really concerned about. We've had the Gallery Climate Coalition come into Royal College to talk to our students. We have a sort of other policies going on around materials and process. So this is a really nice opportunity to join you to have more of a think. And I've just shipped a show to Seoul in a Nike shoebox, which unfortunately I didn't send it by sea because it was all too last minute. It did go by air, but it's pretty small. And the other items went by internet, so and they were produced locally, which is something I'm interested in doing a lot more in coming years, is to use local production opportunities to produce work.
Great idea. And yeah, I think that's a nice concept as well, of course. So Chris, would you like to give us a little introduction about you and Excel?
Sure. So thanks, Annika. Thanks for inviting me on. I'm an art insurer, as I said at the beginning. I work for AXA XL, which until recently was sort of more obviously known as AXA Art, before we had our recent merger with XL. We are the biggest, I think, insurer of fine art in the world by quite a substantial margin. Yeah, my background, unfortunately, has been pretty much insurance all the way. I did start my career as a porter at Bonhams, so a bit of practical experience of the sort of hard end of the art market. But I've worked for an insurance broker specializing in fine art, and then another insurer before being at AXA now for the last nearly 10 years. Like everyone else, I think what we're seeing is both our clients and my employer becoming more and more interested in sustainability and green practices. AXA has a sort of phenomenal record, I think. AXA Group, this is the big parent company, in being kind of very aware of climate change and the results of climate change. And that they have for a long time taken this sort of thing really seriously, and it's great for us to be able to use what is essentially some economic clout in the art market to help promote these practices to the extent that we can work with our clients to do so.
Great, thank you. And I guess I should also mention about myself and my own experience in terms of how it relates to being able to discuss this topic, which is that I was a conservator before I founded ArtEvolve, working at Tay and St. Paul's Cathedral and the Royal Horticultural Society. And I dealt with a lot of shipping and transit, and acted as a courier, and I am quite aware also of the image with museums about sea freight in terms of condition concerns, which is something that we'll be talking about soon. And so that's my kind of perspective. I'm a trained conservator with preservation concerns, even still 10 years on, at the back of my mind when thinking about art and cultural objects. And Simon, do you want to share with us a little introduction?
Of course. First of all, thank you for the invitation as well. And it's always a pleasure to be on a panel with people who are smarter and brighter and more eloquent than I am. So thank you for putting up.
Oh, uh-oh. We lost your sound, Simon.
Can you hear me?
Sorry, we lost your sound for a second, or at least I did.
Yeah,
Well,
you're back.
Yeah, I'll tell you what it is. It's my phone trying to pick up a Bluetooth signal. So let's address that. Yeah, so my background is very much from high value security transport, both from being a practitioner in my former life, and then becoming more involved with the insurance, the risk transfer side of specie, jewelry, and then ultimately fine art, which is the world that I first met Chris many years ago. More recently, for the last 12 years, I've been at Crozier Fine Arts, originally in New York City, and more recently, as Annika indicated, in Europe. And I suppose we're either the villains of the piece or part of the solution. And I firmly believe we're actually part of the solution. And I think it's always good to have an engagement with those that really have a direct involvement in making decisions that can affect the outcomes. So, I would always say that nobody really buys art without insurance. So the insurer always has a seat at the table. The artist is often not represented in many of these discussions. So I think Mark is going to cover that. And then Sarah really is addressing a multitude of disciplines in terms of education, social reality, and certainly those of us who have children under the age, dare I say it, of 30, they keep us honest every day. So I think Annika, you've done a wonderful job in getting everybody together, and really looking forward to an engaging conversation and something that will keep us all honest going forward.
Thank you. That was incredibly eloquent for someone who thought we were all more eloquent. So thank you very much. So I think I have a series of questions and topics here, and also polls. So I'm just going to refer to it for a second so that I don't forget to do our poll at the right moment. So as art professionals get to grips with a new normal, this presents us with an opportunity for change, to do things differently rather than simply returning to old practices. And when it comes to shipping methods, let's discuss for a moment why change is so necessary. So I think what I would like to discuss here, if it's all right with you all, is something around art fairs and capacity and emission statistics and climate goals of Paris Agreement 2030 climate goals. So Chris, I think when we talked earlier, you were going to talk a little bit about art fairs and your experience of kind of increase of transit in recent years.
Yeah, so I think we've probably all seen how the sort of art fair calendar, certainly prior to the pandemic, has really exploded, particularly over the last decade. So what used to be just a handful of international fairs is now an almost annual calendar, sometimes with overlapping events. The results that we can see from our sort of bird's eye position as insurers, who are obviously being advised of items being shipped very frequently, is that the amount of art that's being moved around the world is far greater than ever before. That isn't just limited to art fairs. I think it would be driven also by institutional exhibitions and just a sort of a general explosion in the amount of art that is moved around and how frequently that art is moved around. So I think that was going to be my initial point. We're just looking at a far greater volume of art being shipped than we were even a decade ago. And hopefully Simon can support that from his position as well. I think that to some extent drives issues of capacity, if nothing else. And I think each year that goes by, to try and get everything to the right place for these events is more and more challenging. But again, I'm probably treading on Simon's toes by going into too much detail on that. So for us as insurers, I think, sea transits have always been riskier than air transits. That is just the basic profile of a sea transit compared to an air transit in risk terms. But obviously we want to try and support the choices that our clients are making, both out of necessity and through pure choice. And so that's why we've sort of started to try and work on how we can better manage sea transits from an insurance point of view.
Great. Well, thank you so much. And in terms, and I think that while I personally do not have the bird's eye view that you do over all of the movement and activity of the art sector, I have read, because of doing, I have done pitch deck presentations to investors in which I have to talk about the art market and kind of stats around, the size of the market, right? And in that research, I have seen that in terms of quantifying the art fair explosion, I believe that a little over a decade ago, there was around a dozen major art fairs, and then pre-COVID there was 300. So yes,
there you go. That's
quite an explosion.
That's a big increase.
Well, I think you actually you're light on that figure. I think the last time I looked at it, there were 265 recognizable major art fairs, but each one spawns a number of satellites. So there's a multiplier effect as well. So I think it was actually quite easy pre-COVID to come up with a list of close on 1,000 art fairs that hence have recognition in the marketplace. Some were regional and some are international. And I think that's one of the perhaps interesting topics to explore a little later in this conversation, is what we've seen during the pandemic and coming out of it is potentially a shift from a truly global art fair to one that is more regionally based, which potentially means that there can be more consolidated transport through trucks rather than flying everything in by air or even sea containers. So, some of these unintended consequences are beginning to come out, but we're in the early days. And that's why I think a forum such as this, in both posing questions and then potentially providing a few solutions, can actually drive the agenda. Because I think it's only when we're doing this on a collaborative basis, talking amongst everybody, that you get the level of engagement that we really need. None of us on this panel, and I would suggest no one person who's joined this webinar, can actually provide the solution. It's only on a collective basis that we can really move forward. So I think it was worse than you outlined, but potentially there's already some indications as to how we can start looking at this.
I think that is a great point, and something that I am always repeating kind of every chance I get is about collaboration between particularly the commercial, the private, and the public sector. And part of the reason for that is that I think it's a great shame that the kind of entrepreneurial spirit that you mentioned, Mark, is unfortunately in the public sector not appreciated a lot of the time. and this is part of the reason that museums are so glacial, as they are. And I think that is something that we really need to address, and that I agree, we really need to work together in order to deal with this emergency that we have. And without kind of lots of suspicion of each other and our motives, and to just accept the fact that and also speaking to what Simon said about, the villain in the room, I think that very much shippers are not the villains. They're just doing what they're service providers that are doing what they've been asked to do. And I think that it's really time for people not only to kind of take responsibility for their own choices of how they operate, rather than kind of, finger pointing at others, but also to, of course, it's systems change, right, that we need. And that's true for kind of every industry, every facet of our lives. And yes, it's a complicated problem, and there's not like one easy solution, unfortunately, but it's usually a kind of, multiple things that make up a kind of, spectrum of solutions. And yes, one partial solution could be doing a lot more locally based fairs, and that could be a great thing that would be, good for everyone. And also this idea that a lot of people have of like, or at least have had, I think it's changing now, but I think, a few years ago, pre-pandemic, a lot of people thought, well, this is the way it is, not going to change. It's too big of a, beast now to ever make change. But I think it's really useful to then point out things like, well, 20 years ago, there were a lot fewer fairs. So we did cope not so long ago with fewer fairs, and it's not a foregone conclusion that we must have 1,000 fairs, right? We've lived through a time when there were none. And so, not that I'm saying we should not have any more fairs at all, but I think it's just useful to, one thing that was good about the pandemic, I think, was just kind of shaking things up and making us realize that, we can change if required. So one thing I'm going to do a poll on in just a moment is regarding barriers for use of more sea freight. But I wonder if we could talk about a few of the challenges to do with sea freight, and also in terms of, before we move on from why change is necessary, why don't we talk for a second about the emissions comparison of sea freight compared with road and air, and also the capacity issues that we mentioned and the climate goals. So quickly, right off the bat, as we probably are all very aware, the 2030 goals are for 52% decrease of carbon footprint by 2030, right? Which is not far away. And so I think that, considering that carbon footprints in general are, ever increasing, even flatlining, and then, turning it in the right direction is going to require, as you've heard buzzwords in sustainability talking about, exponential change, right? This is supposed to be the decade of change and turning things around. And so, yeah, we have to make some pretty significant changes in order to meet those challenging goals. And in terms of the emission statistics of comparison of sea versus air, we worked out, And we're not experts in this. I will give a caveat right now, and I'm interested to hear any statistics that you all have. But when we worked it out, when we were doing the stats for our design museum case study, we found that it looked like in kind of apples to apples, same weight comparison for a flight from New York to London versus a sea freight, that it was around 44 times less, 44 times lower carbon footprint using sea compared with air. And I have got a case study here for that move. Simon, I don't know if you have any statistics that you want to share while I spin that up. Just going to share.
So our assessment, like for like, is that moving a consignment from London to New York, when you factor in transport to London Gateway or Southampton and unloading at the other end, it's roughly 5%. So you're reducing that carbon footprint by 95%. That's our assessment.
So that's not too shabby.
No, I mean, there are a number of, devil is in the detail always, but I think as a headline, that should grab people's attention. It then relies on having, a full container rather than a half empty container, which means that you may have to put together different clients. Are clients happy being co-loaded? You get into other complexities of having the right paperwork, but in principle, that should grab everybody's attention, I think.
Absolutely, and I've got a case study here, which Cadogan Tate shared with me the other day, which is for a transport of Gary Hume. You might all have been aware that Gary Hume was in the press recently because of the BP Portrait Awards, saying, BP, what gives? And then he felt that after pointing the finger at BP, he better quickly switch from air to sea freight for his upcoming exhibition. And so he duly did, which is great. So don't want to poo-poo on that at all. But anyway, so they found 96%, so pretty much on par with your findings at Crozier, and that was 24 tons were saved by this choice, which is the equivalent of 16,500 people driving 2 miles each way to visit an art gallery. So that is an interesting illustration, but there you go. It's always difficult, isn't it, to kind of put these things into terms that we can kind of understand and get our head around. But anyway, I want to thank them for sharing that case study and helping us to put these things into those sorts of terms. And so I think that that's just important for us to keep in mind. We all agree we need to change. There's lots of ways we can do it. One of them is sea freight. It's quite a significant savings, as we've just seen, but there are some barriers. And there have been those barriers. There's been advocates for sea freight for a long time. In speaking with the Gallery Climate Coalition and the founding members, including Victoria, the director of Frieze, Victoria Siddell, sorry. She was talking about, advocating for years for sea freight, but from their point of view, there have been a few different challenges, but the biggest being insurance and artists finishing artwork in time for the longer time scale that would be required to do sea freight. So I think that we should talk about those two key challenges, but also the other peripheral challenges, because of course there's also, in terms of timescales, there's also the timescale issue of collectors purchasing work at the art fair and just wanting it to get it home and on the wall quickly, because that's nicer than waiting a long time. And so it's not just about the artists and the galleries, but it's also about the collectors, and there are various kind of stakeholders here, right? But if we start by talking about the insurance and the artists getting things ready in time piece and move from there, I think that would be useful. So Chris, maybe you can talk to us a little bit about kind of traditionally, what the challenges have been in comparison. You mentioned that it's considered riskier, it has been. And so why is that, and what is changing about that?
Okay, so in very broad terms, there are sort of two big elements to why sea transits are often riskier than air transits. I don't want to overstate the difference as well, and I think it's important to frame this with that. We're talking about it's not as much as double as risky, for example. It's probably, it's a relatively modest additional risk. But the first point is accidental damage caused by sort of impact and shock. Obviously, there are sort of forces on items in air transit, but the forces that the shipping containers and the artwork within them come under during sea transits, particularly during the handling, actually, when the vessel isn't at sea, but when it's being loaded or unloaded, those forces are potentially more substantial for sea transits than they are for air. So that's the first thing. The second thing is a really obvious one, which is climatic conditions. So anything that's sensitive to moisture or any kind of sort of sudden change in humidity or anything else will tend to be more vulnerable when being shipped by sea than by air, unless certain precautions are taken. And I think, it is ultimately about taking precautions that we can erode that difference between sea and air transit. We, as an industry, have been looking for a little while at how we can sort of incrementally improve the logistics chain for sea transit so that it threatens artwork as little as possible. We've done that in conjunction with various insurers in the industry, but also some marine surveyors, sort of various industry bodies, the Gallery Climate Coalition. We're still sort of seeking input from various sources as well. But ultimately, what we're looking to create is a sort of set of guidelines that are practical for both galleries and shippers to follow, but that also minimize the risks that I'm talking about to the extent that we as insurers don't need to inadvertently disincentivize people behaving in a greener way if that's how they want to choose to move their artwork. So, we don't want to have to exclude certain types of cover. We don't want to have to charge substantially more money for these transits. And by working on the risks in this way, we can, try not to do that. So that's work that's been going on now for 6 months or more, and hopefully we'll have this sort of finalized guidelines document available very soon.
Great. Well, and while we're on the subject of the new guidelines, let me just quickly, I'm going to share my screen. And just to give everyone a visual of what that is going to look like. So we have baked in the guidelines into our virtual career solution so that you can demonstrate compliance to them through our tool. And so these little icons with the hands and the heart are part of the guidelines, essentially, or they're required checks for the guidelines. And here you can see images of a container, and it mentions, let me back that up. It mentions some wording from the guidelines about how they must be inspected, and also an example checklist of what to look for is provided. So these are all things which help to reduce risk at key moments. So let's see, let me stop that sharing. Okay. So I think, and I know that the Gallery Climate Coalition has been, very active in this conversation, haven't they, of wanting to help encourage galleries and artists and the art world in general to use more sea freight, to make it more insurable. And from what I understand, these guidelines, once they are officially launched, it will mean that once you have had your renewal and your premium, your policy has been updated, you won't have to have pre-approval for doing sea freight anymore, which will help make it easier for doing more sea freight, so long as you comply to the guidelines, right?
That's the broad intention. I'm not sure that we can sort of guarantee it quite yet, but that's certainly what we're intending to do. Obviously, this initiative has been kind of involved a lot of other insurers. I don't know and wouldn't be able to comment on how they will try to incorporate those guidelines into their own practices.
Sure.
But certainly, of the people who've been involved in this discussion, you know, what we're looking to do, as I said a few minutes ago, is make sure that we just aren't disincentivizing this in any way. And that means making it convenient for people, not expensive for them, and not restrictive. So yeah, in broad terms, that's definitely where we're heading.
And I would just like to say, as the conservator in the virtual room, that I think it's really important for those of us that are in charge of the long-term preservation of our cultural heritage and artwork to mirror that kind of thinking, right? We have to start thinking in terms of short-term versus long-term risk. You know, do I really need that crate to be on its own in a truck? Do I really need that thing to fly, you know, rather than go in, you know, road or sea in a way that has less carbon footprint? Is that really necessary when I think about the potential kind of catastrophic damage to cultural heritage, you know, if the earth warms up as much as it quite possibly will if we don't act drastically soon. So I think that that is something which, you know, even kind of risk analysis in general in collection management and conservation is something which it's been kind of a hot topic in terms of how it's approached and what the kind of structure for that ought to be. But I think that this is a really important shift in thinking for those of us who are, you know, in charge of the long-term preservation of things to really take that long-term into consideration in a different way than we have previously. But so turning now to the artist piece, which is kind of the main reason we're here, right? The main reason we're here is to start the important work of kind of driving awareness and increasing awareness of the issues for sea freight and how we can address them and how artists can learn about them and perhaps change their practices in order to give more time for shipping and to advocate for greener protocols and procedures, including an increase of use of sea freight. So Mark and Sarah, do you think you could speak a little bit to that?
Yeah, I'm happy to go first, and then I'd love for Sarah to explain her kind of methodology, because I think that is a really radical solution. But I think that the fundamental barrier, as I see it, I think you're right, it is around thinking about long-term sustainability, and for artists to put that into the front of their minds in negotiation with galleries around exhibition times, etc. Because the artist is often disenfranchised in the whole kind of power mechanisms of getting works to art fairs, but also exhibitions and biennials. And I think we have to remember that. But the artists do have power, particularly collectively, to say, no, we need time to plan and produce work, and we need reassurances that the whole process will be thought about from beginning to end in terms of the ecological impact. And that is something that they can't do themselves independently, because they are part of a wider ecology, but collectively they can speak to that demand. But fundamentally, I think that part of this is actually down to, it is the logistics and kind of bureaucracy of these things, which are inescapable. Fundamentally, you know, the really interesting work you've done is you've taken this idea of a condition report, which was really haphazard, confused, and not really well thought through, and said this needs to be updated. So it's something that there are standards that can be shared, and the artist can understand what those standards are, as well as the curators and conservators. So I think fundamentally that is the really first main shift. Condition of a work and the instructions of how it's constructed need to be rigorously thought through and clearly articulated the whole way through the process. That makes insurance possible, but it also means that if the artist is sending materials that can be constructed somewhere else, those instructions need to go with that material really clearly as well. And I think that Sarah alluded to it, but certainly at a board meeting today, artists on the board certainly spoke about that notion that we are, for example, within the Venice Biennale, we are going to see much more work constructed on site. All of the larger materials will be sourced on site and done on site. And only those things which are absolutely necessary to transport need to be transported. So I think that that's going to be a really massive sea change. But also I think just going back again from that artist point of view, in the sense of being global as an artist, it is thinking about being in that sense rooted into a different type of practice, which maybe returns to a more kind of 70s mode of thinking about situated installation within gallery as something which yeah, it's quite fundamental to the thinking about why an artwork is made in a certain place. So I think the problem a little bit with the art fair is the scale of objects moved is not because of their aesthetic impact so much as their commercial value. And we need to think more about the aesthetic impact on why an artwork should be at a certain place before moving it as well. But I think that Sarah's going to have a lot more to say about that with the work she's done around the Superstore.
Hi,
Thank you. That's an interesting point.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, I've been running this project called Superstore for a long time. It started in the 90s, and the idea is it's a kind of a store for artworks, for editions, for lower cost artwork. And as much as it being a store, it kind of looks back to the history of meeting and trading, to the kind of agora, the idea of the trading place as a place of conversation, which is very much what happens with art fairs. They're very important on a social level. So Superstore thinks about the kind of social aspects of art as much as the objects. And so just earlier this summer, I did a quite substantial Superstore for the South London Gallery. And basically, the majority of work was sourced from London. I'm also very keen in Superstore to not necessarily have artists produce new work for the Superstore. Most artists have an enormous amount of stuff already. They've been working for a while. Often things are hidden in studios and just sitting there doing nothing. So Superstore can become a kind of repository for these sorts of pieces of work that already exist, and to give them new sort of framing through the way that the work's installed, and to just bring them out into the open air again. So I think that's quite good. And then the idea that nearly the majority of work came from the UK meant that shipping was negated. One box of t-shirts came from Germany, but everything else came from the UK. And then right now, I've just, it's just sort of opening right now really in Asia is a new Superstore, and I'd like to quickly show you some images. So this is the top of the shoebox that it was shipped in. So in this shoebox was an edition by the artist Nicole Vermers, 5 catalogues, which are the Superstore inventory book, and 9 small metal artworks that I made. And then we'll go to another image.
You stopped sharing your screen. Oh, there you go. Okay,
Yeah,
sorry.
back again, hopefully. Oh, what am I sharing now? Hold on a second. Can you see everything on my screen now?
Yes.
Okay, that's fine. So here we go. It looks a bit messy. Sorry about that. Here's the work, the show installed. So this is a show with 10 prints by UK London-based artists and some small sculpture. And the digital prints were printed in Seoul, and they're installed on these, they're all framed and they're installed on this kind of a display mechanism where they're floating. Some of them are floating a little bit in front of the wall, which really gives the sense that they could be screens. They're not screens, but we really like this play between kind of IRL and screen-based, and we want to play with that in the way that the install was designed. And then here we have the inventory, and then you can see two of the very small sculptures that I sent. I realized over lockdown that there was really no need to make, I do make large works, I make public sculpture that's really quite substantial in terms of scale, but also during lockdown I got extremely keen on making very small work that I could make while I was in Zooms. So I've been working with wax and clay, making tiny pieces, and I think, why can't more artwork be extremely small? It seems like a really good idea. It's very easy to transport. I'm very lucky to live quite close to Hatton Garden, which is the last kind of production zone within London. There used to be furniture making in London. There was, you know, all sorts of different kind of craft activity in London, and Hatton Garden's the last one where artwork can be fabricated. So there's lots of casting going on there. So yeah, that's kind of what I've done, and it's been really enjoyable and interesting challenge. Obviously, paintings have a different kind of allure because the texture of the canvas and the paint and the sort of also with sculpture, like all sorts of material aspects. You know, those IRL experiences with objects are spectacular and fantastic. But I think there's also a lot of scope to explore how we use digital as a kind of mode of transporting work across the world. So yeah.
I also think there's a nice connection with making small work in terms of selling online and kind of democratization of art, in the sense of, you know, more average real people being able to afford a smaller piece and being happy to discover it online and purchase it if it's, you know, of a more affordable price tag, right? And then those things don't have to go to a major art fair and be seen by a kind of more professional level collector. It's something which is more like blurring the lines between merchandise and artwork, which is something that I really appreciated, again, happening over COVID. I remember trying to get into galleries in London when they were just opening back up, and you had to, you know, get a slot, and all the slots were taken. And I was looking at Marion Goodman Gallery, and even though the slot was taken and I was sad, I discovered through that on their New York gallery site, they had these pins that were editioned and approved by the Roy Lichtenstein estate, and were like $25 each and beautiful. And I was like, hooray, wearable art. I'm gonna get 5 of them and give them to friends for gifts. So, you know,
yeah. Yeah, I did that for South London Gallery. I made very small clay tokens. They're about the size of, I don't know what they're the size of, usually about 2 or 3 centimeters in diameter. And they're glazed and they're all hand modeled. And I sold over 100 of them from South London Gallery, which was really nice. And they were £10. And it's very much the idea of art for all. They're really fun to make. They don't take me any time whatsoever. So yeah, it's nice.
Lovely. Yeah, that's really wonderful. So, you know, it goes again back to this kind of idea of like, there's a whole lot of solutions out there, right? It's not, and also this play between online and in real life, I think it's a really interesting, you know, area for us to explore further in the future. Now that I think another thing about COVID is like, rather than just kind of going back to how things were, you know, let's take stock of how things are now and what are the good bits, and, you know, what's the infrastructure that we've now created because of, you know, now everybody has more e-commerce, you know, options in terms of the galleries and things. So great, that's really interesting. Thank you. Now, in terms of other issues, there are also capacity issues, right? Simon, do you want to speak a little bit to that in terms of the short-term issues, but also kind of generally in the long term, what you see?
Well, I mean, before I get on to that, I think there are a couple of things I'd just like as observations to make. So the first thing really is that I think what Sarah and Mark were talking about is kind of some behavioral change here in terms of expectations. And I think that anything that challenges people to reflect on what is good, and I use that in a very loose term, and bad, is never bad. That's a productive conversation in this context. So that's number one. And I take the idea of this sense of gratification. You've bought something, you want to receive the artwork tomorrow. And as a shipping company, we're faced with a few challenges there. So yes, we can buy air freight, we can get it on the next flight to Hong Kong, New York, and we can also offer you a carbon offset. So you can kind of go, all right, I've ticked that box, I can go to sleep, I've been a good citizen. But at the same time, we can also offer that alternative, which is to send it by the slower route. We can consolidate it with a whole lot of other artwork going to that same market. The problem is you're going to have to wait maybe 8 weeks, 10 weeks, 12 weeks. The cost will be far less to you. The carbon footprint is going to be far less. Yes, we can still offer you a carbon offset for that 5% rather than the 100%. But at the end of the day, what is the motivation going to change for a buyer if we simply lay out those options without anything else? And my own belief is we have to go further than that. And I think, you know, having the insurance, having some more compelling reasons for why somebody would not go for prime Amazon delivery the next day and accept that something has got to be delivered later is one of the behavioral changes that we should be discussing collectively. So that's just one observation, one comment. And we're working with one of our auction house clients to look at how through some test cases, some pilot projects, we can get insight into how to understand, in the first case, that behavior, and secondly, how we, to meet all of our standards, and the auction house with their endeavor to reach carbon neutrality over the next 8 years can support each other together with the other parts of this kind of ecosystem, whether it's the artist, the gallery, whoever it may be, to actually look at this in a holistic way rather than just simply getting your stuff tomorrow. So number one. Number two, as an industry, and I talk about art transportation, art logistics, we're relatively small. Globally, it's about $1.5 billion. It may be a little larger, but in context, that is the size of the soda water dispenser market globally. So if you think how niche that is, we're pretty niche as well. So we can have the best intentions, but ultimately we have to rely on other industries to drive that agenda. So for example, pharmaceuticals, you know, billions and billions of dollars shipping, air freight, less by sea, fulfillment services. So in this context, what I would like to suggest is that we have to ride the coattails of others. And therefore, it's first of all good for us to understand how other industries have addressed this, because they're going to move the needle more than we can, being brutally honest about it. So I would therefore say, as a business and also as a consumer, we should therefore be looking at and both supporting those industries that have a common perspective and a common objective. So I think it's very easy to say, oh, I can't influence this any beyond my art buying habits and how I would want to ship, whether you're a museum registrar. But at the same time, you can influence anything that's going on in your daily purchases, how you think about transport yourself, and how you buy as a consumer. So I don't want to get, you know, into this totalitarian mentality about it, but I would encourage all of the viewers of this webinar to reflect on how we can all collectively move that dial such that we in the art world can benefit from the investment and the changes that others make. And I would lastly say our parent company is a global corporate, Iron Mountain. Their mission is to buy all of their power from renewable sources, and that is now the case throughout the US and most of Europe. And so when we think about allyship, we can find that in some really great places. So enough of my preaching from the pulpit here. I just think it's a collective responsibility that all of us should be engaged with.
I think that is absolutely spot on, Simon. Thank you. And I also, you're just reminding me, I heard recently about new solar paneled ships for sea freight that are being built, which will bring that 95% down to 100% in the not too distant future. So that's an interesting innovation in shipping that is kind of being discussed for this, you know, yeah, the much larger world of shipping that exists. And you're absolutely right. I think that what is, you know, the even bigger picture from a culture perspective when it comes to sustainability, because we are a niche, let's face it, you know, it's true that our carbon footprint compared with a lot of the, you know, bigger villains, if we want to use that word again, of carbon footprints were relatively small. However, we in culture have a really important voice. You know, we have a really important role of educating society, and we can't very well do that and can't very well advocate sustainable practices and educate society on sustainability related issues and challenges and change and plans of governments and all the rest of it that we all are going to need to get really, you know, into over this next decade, unless we are addressing our own industry in terms of how we can shift to more sustainable practices. You know, we have to practice what we preach. Otherwise, we lose all credibility. So from my perspective, you know, that's the larger issue is really, you know, culture can be a really powerful advocate for change and educator of how we can do it and driving people to think more creatively in terms of solutions and understand, you know, what solutions already might exist. And just help people discover and engage and become interested and challenged by this emergency that we face, rather than, you know, overwhelmed and depressed. So I think that you're definitely right that we need to ride on the coattails of other industries, and but if we remain kind of interested and engaged, then, you know, we can certainly do that. So in terms of the next thing I'm going to do here is launch a poll, which is about to see what our audience thinks. Here we go. About what barriers they're facing in terms of using more sea freight. So let's see what answers we get. And we can address any concerns they mention, which we have not yet addressed. Now, one that I can already see is a concern is the kind of short-term supply chain issues that we have now. You know, I almost didn't get my friends round from London last weekend because of the petrol shortage. I had a builder in yesterday to give me a quote about some things to my house, in which he said, you know, material costs have gone up 25% because all of the Yanks are stealing all of the materials, and there's shipping containers going back empty, and you have to pay for the cost of, you know, that. So there's all kinds of, you know, in the grander scale of wider industries and supply chain, I know that there's a lot of disruption and difficulty as we kind of heave ourselves out of these, you know, travel restrictions and COVID situations that we're all in. But we hope that that is a temporary issue, right? And that ultimately, you know, we'll have enough, you know, where basically ultimately where there is demand, you know, the supply will kind of even itself out. Do you agree with that, Simon, in particular? I can see Chris shaking his head. Yes, he agrees.
There are a few elements that ring true on that. I'm not sure you know, casting the Americans in that light, but it's all to do. It's a global infrastructure that anywhere you get a glitch, you're going to have a knock-on effect, whether it's Evergreen getting stuck in the Suez Canal or more containers going on one particular trade route. It's how it is now. And so to the earlier point about time, you have to plan for this. You know, it's a different world when you start looking at this type of time frame for planning for anything when you sit by ship, when you're shipping by sea. And I think when you look at other industries, they have different challenges, but they've understood this for a decade or more. We're discovering it slowly as an industry.
Right. That is a good point. And one other thing I'll kind of call out in terms of this like systems change and kind of building back better and, you know, seizing the moment is, you know, now we talked about kind of democratization of artwork, but also just online sales in general, right? I mean, last year was 25% of you know, the market sales were online. And I think the year before it was 6%, 7%. So there's a massive increase. And although we're all excited about seeing each other and artwork in person again, it doesn't necessarily have to go back to the same crazy frenetic levels, right? So perhaps we should utilize those systems and, you know, still have more, you know, hybrid things, online things, in real life things, and just look at what really, what elements are really suited to different platforms, right? For how we engage with art. One thing that I'm excited about, one thing that I enjoyed in the online viewing rooms really, probably particularly, was artist interviews. You know, that was a really nice aspect of the kind of move to online. And so I hope that that continues. But anyway, so back to the poll. I'm going to end it now so everyone can see. So it looks like the top concern is the short-term supply chain issues we mentioned, but luckily that it will naturally somewhat fall away, we hope. And then insurance is certainly a concern, but it looks like that concern is kind of hopefully reducing based on our conversation. Buyers wanting quick delivery is the second highest concern next to supply chain issues. And I do think that that is, people are right to be concerned about that. And that is something that will only diminish over time as, you know, we are gently encouraging our clients to choose another method, right? And so, but I think that something we can control, at least, you know, initially, is getting it to the point of purchase. And so there are also, the next largest concern are condition concerns, which is something we haven't spoken too much about yet. But I will say that Chris mentioned, you know, things which are sensitive to changes in humidity, for example. As a paper conservator, you know, that was something that I grappled with a lot in my career. And so I know that, you know, there are certain kinds of materials that are less feasible for sea freight than others. And but there are also things you can do in terms of, you know, climate controlled crates is one thing. And, you know, there are different reusable crate products that exist now in the world. There are, you know, rock boxes and turtles, for example. Turtles have climate control, I believe. Rock boxes don't, but they're coming out with an ultra lightweight crate that's 100% domestically recyclable, which might be more appropriate for, you know, when you're using air, and like the heavy, more robust ones might be more appropriate for sea. So, and also there's sensors, right? I think, Simon, said that you've been doing some experimenting with sensors at sea, and that's something that we hope we can help highlight in future, what your findings have been. Have you got any early statistics for us, or not yet?
Well, here's a shocker, that humidity goes up in a sea container when it's on the ocean.
No.
But that was expected. What was more alarming was some of the temperature variations. So really, you don't have any control over the environment. So if you're shipping a Richard Serra or something like that, you're good to go. You're just helping with the patina. But I think we're doing some trials now with a reefer, which is really an air-conditioned unit set with different set points. And some of the food containers, provided they've been thoroughly sterilized, you can actually attempt to control the relative humidity as well. There's a cost to this. So yet again, it comes back to consumer behavior and decisions. Are people prepared to pay more for a product which addresses that particular risk exposure, that Chris outlined a little earlier? And really, the risk transfer in that situation is using better equipment, more appropriate to moving artworks in that environment. So, it's a work in progress as we run through this, but we're always happy to share these results, because I think, yet again, making the point that it's only when we share this can we actually make collective decisions that everybody can buy into. So,
absolutely. And I would also go so far as to say we need to try it out. We need to do the moves. We need to do it on things which are lower risk to start with, so that we can gather more data, so that we can then gain confidence to do it with other things, right? And so I would really encourage people to try it out and also to share information. We're actively seeking data points to collect in order to create market reports on these issues. And I know that the guidelines, I believe, require reefer containers, right? The new insurance guidelines. Is that right, Chris?
Sorry, pardon me.
I believe your guidelines require reefer containers, as an example, in order to reduce.
Not in every instance, but they would definitely be recommended for anything that's sensitive to climate.
Right, great. And I think that use of sensors and sea freight trips are also a really great thing to opt in for, as, again, in order for us to kind of collect data collectively and share it with each other in order to understand exactly what the issues really are. So
that's going to give us so much more visibility over sort of what can be achieved and what we need to focus on. So yeah, we're sort of looking forward to getting more and more data on that in the insurance world as well.
Yes, and we have a sensor partner, Parcel Live, which is part of HANHA, in which we are planning to integrate so that we can facilitate, better standardized collection of data that can then be utilized for this kind of research for insurers and for the market generally. And so I hope that is going to help us, push the needle and move in the right direction. Obviously, this isn't going to be an overnight thing where, suddenly from freeze this year, everybody's going to use sea freight. It's going to be a more measured approach and shift than that, I'm sure. But it has to start with the first steps. And I'm really grateful. I have already got secured case studies from the Zabudovich collection and also the Lisson Gallery as a GCC member to that effort to try and show spearheading in the right direction and to gather data and to share it and to provide social proof and all the rest. So it's really great that some people are willing to step up and do that. We are over time now, so I'm just going to quickly address a couple of questions and then we will call it a day. Patrick Davies has said, also, artists in some instances can instruct galleries not to ship works full stop until sold. Technology and new ways of viewing can enable this, and shipping can become then a once only. So that's another interesting idea. Thank you, Patrick Davies. And Robert Aspinall, hello Robert, has also said, we must address packaging also, both packaging being suitable for ocean and packaging being eco-friendly. Which is an excellent point. And I know that GCC have been collaborating with Key Culture, I introduced them, on this very topic, which is, and in fact, I believe that they've just published last week some recommendations with packaging. It's difficult because it's about whether or not it's like temporary packaging or long-term packaging and the impact that might bring. But I know that they are looking at some biodegradable temporary packaging. as an alternative to plastic-based packaging for transit. So that is a great thing. But of course, we must be mindful then that on arrival, people can't just, you know, leave the crate there in a warehouse somewhere for years and expect that I mean, this actually has been an issue, which I've recently discussed with Key Culture. This is a good opportunity for us to address this issue, which is already endemic in our art world system, which has been a worry for me as a conservator for a long time. A lot of storage is like supposed to be temporary and ends up being long term, and the storage, you know, packaging and container is not necessarily long-term approved, right? And a lot of times collectors are, you know, unfortunately unaware and uneducated about this concern. So that's a topic for another day. But Patricia Loico, sorry if I mispronounced that, Patricia, from the Government Indemnity Scheme in America asks, all risk fine art insurance policies have excluded sea freight coverage unless there is a guarantee of lower deck stowage. Is this still the case? And how possible is it to secure lower deck container placement? Excellent question, Patricia. I know a shipper who says that she used to just lie and say things were very heavy in the old days in order to secure that lower placement. But I don't know how feasible that is as a, you know, SOP moving forward. What do you think, Chris and Simon? Is that, how feasible is it to get things in the lower decks?
Well, I'll go first, and Simon can answer on the feasibility point. But I haven't obviously seen every single insurance policy in the world, but the one wording that I have seen that seems to be used very commonly for sea transits only mandates that you should request that the item is secured below deck. Certainly, we've always known that that isn't always achievable, and that the captain of any vessel has to have the sort of ultimate say-so as to where, you know, everything is stowed on that ship for reasons of balance and everything else. No, I don't think that it's mandated that it must travel below deck, but I think it is quite commonly mandated that you must at least try to make sure that it is by asking for it, that you've discharged your duty just by requesting that, even if it doesn't actually get done, and that wouldn't affect your policy coverage. So,
Simon, do you have an idea of how often that request is granted in your experience?
I don't actually. What I would say is, I think Chris answered it well. You can request it, you can't guarantee it. What I would say influences the ability to get it below decks is getting it there early. But of course, the counter risk to there is it may be sitting, if the ship is then delayed, it may be sitting there for longer than you would otherwise want. So my own personal view is working with some of the, yet again, it's a somewhat subjective statement, but better shipping lines, you're more likely to get the schedule is more likely to be adhered to, and they do provide a much more client-friendly service. But yet again, you're working with agents as well as the shipping line. So it's one of those things you really don't have a great deal of control over. Whereas if it's on your own truck, or you are loading it into an aircraft and you're airside and you actually see, you know, which part of the plane it's going into, you do have that element of visibility. We've tried to get access to the docks, but certainly since COVID, that's been nigh impossible. So it's, I mean, Chris has outlined it well. You have less control, less visibility, and therefore, in terms of best practices, it's probably as, if not more important, that shippers and their clients adhere to all of these areas that will reduce that risk.
Great. Thank you, Simon. Well, I think we will finish there. And thank you so much for joining us this time on our special edition of our ArtEvolve series. I really appreciate both our viewers and our panelists. Thank you so much. This is an important topic that is near and dear to my heart. I really appreciate your engagement on it. Thank you.
Very much. Thank you.
Brilliant.
Great.
So,
Thank
and
you.
very quickly, I just started to imagine a super deluxe boat specifically for art shipping.
Nice.
Very nice idea. Yeah.
Sounds good. A solar paneled one while we're at it, eh?
I don't know who's going to pay for that, but it could be really great.
Yeah, maybe it could be, you know, part-time yacht party boat. We're a billionaire and part-time super.
Off-season party boat.
Exactly. It'll also deliver your artwork.
Yeah, make it really competitive to be able to book your transit on that boat.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well,
Thank you so
very
much, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.